So first off, I want to introduce both myself and Eric. So my name is Alan Burt. I'm the founder and CEO over at Blue Stout. Blue Stout is an e-commerce optimization firm. We work primarily with 7, 8, 9-figure brands, and we help them optimize revenue on site. And this is through a combination of zero, A/B testing, design, and development. And today I've got Eric Myers, who's our head of optimization, who's joining me here today.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining.
And what Eric and I are going to do is we are going to focus today specifically on talking about homepage and homepage optimization. And we'll talk about sort of the nuance of this. And today we're really focusing on how do you optimize your homepage for both new visitors and also returning visitors. We'll talk about why that returning visitor segment is so important right now. And that's what we're going to be covering today. So right before we jump in, I know we've got a few more people that are joining here as I'm talking. So guys, as you're joining, feel free to just drop into the chat. You know who you're working with, what brand you work on, or what brand you own, and also where you're joining us from, just to get the chat moving. And then also for everybody who's joining today, we're going to be going through a presentation, a very quick presentation, sort of outlining our strategy and framework for how we think about homepage optimization. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes, going through that, and then we're going to jump straight into live teardowns. And so the idea is, we have a few brands that we want to show you and tear down. That way, you can actually see and practice how these strategies apply to live brand homepages. And then for anybody who has joined that does, feel free or does want to have their homepage torn down by Eric and I, if you want to sacrifice yourself as tribute today, feel free to drop your link into the chat. And what we'll do is we'll get through as many of those as we can, and we'll do that here at the end. So I'll prompt you guys here at the end of the first teardown. But if you guys want us to take a look at something on your site, specifically the homepage, drop it in the chat, and we'll start taking a look. Awesome. And I think Daniel's asking about a recording of the webinar. Yes, we will. We are recording this. So if you guys are attending, we'll make sure to send out a copy of the recording. All right, so for those who are not familiar with us, most of you guys have joined most likely because you're on our newsletter, The Commerce Lab. The Commerce Lab is backed by Blue Stout. Blue Stout is the agency that brings the Commerce Lab content to you guys on a weekly basis. And like I mentioned, we are specifically an e-commerce optimization firm. So we work with 7, 8, and 9-figure brands, everything from upstarts all the way to large 9-figure companies. To help them optimize on-site revenue. And that typically is us digging into analytics, understanding what's working, what's not working on site, doing usability reviews on site to understand what's working and not working, and then putting together very specific optimization playbooks where we help brands A/B test into all of the performance improvements that are going to drive higher revenue per session on site. So that is our expertise, and we back all that up with a design and development team that's been doing this for 10 plus years. And so what we're going to be talking about today isn't just sort of like industry best practices. Really what we're going to be talking about today is learnings that our team has developed over the past decade plus of doing this for fast growing D2C brands. And so that's where all the content comes from all the presentations that we do and all the content that we produce through our Commerce Lab newsletter. If you are attending today, for anybody who attends the webinar, we always offer this to live attendees. And the first thing we do for every brand that we work with is we do a detailed analytics and site audit. And that's what actually shows us where the area of opportunity is for your brand specifically. So if you're joining us today and you have opportunity on site that you are not capitalizing on, but you can't quite put your finger on what you need to change or what should be changed, or you don't quite know how to A/B test into those changes, reach out to our team. Go to bluestout.com/strategy. Or if you just go to bluestout.com, you'll see a big book a call button in the top right corner. Book a call with somebody on our team, and we can talk to you about doing a full site audit. Just mention that you were on the webinar, and we will give you 50% off that full site audit. So that's something we're offering to everybody on the presentation today. All right, so let's jump into the content. So what are we talking about today? So what we want to focus on and speak to specifically is what is the anatomy of a high converting homepage, specifically as it relates to returning visitors. And I'm going to double click on this idea of returning visitors here in just a second, and why that is so important right now. And as a part of this, we're going to talk a lot about what's the psychology that is behind those elements that should be displayed to a new visitor, to somebody who is unaware of the brand versus somebody who is very brand aware or is a returning visitor or a returning customer. How should you be thinking about what you should be showing those different types of segments on your homepage? And we'll be talking about that. And we're going to break down a framework, very specifically, sort of 3 strategies that you should be thinking about for optimizing for both new and returning. And then, like I mentioned to everybody who joined earlier, and I'll repeat it again, we are going to be doing some live teardowns. So we've got a couple brands that we're going to do live teardowns for right off the bat, just to show you guys how to put into practice the strategies we're talking about today. And then we'll open this up to everybody on the call. If you want to share your homepage, if you guys want us to tear it down, share it in the chat, and we'll get through as many of those as we can in the time that we have today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the current environment and why this actually is a topic we wanted to cover today. So at the end of the day, and this is something we've seen, and this isn't, we didn't just make up the topic, right? This is something that we've seen got lots of questions about recently from our clients and the brands that we are working with, where brands are understanding that right now acquiring new customers is becoming very challenging. And there's a lot of headwinds that are facing e-commerce today. Brands are facing, increasing customer acquisitions costs. So we just see steady increases in CAC across the board. A lot of that is being driven very specifically just by the changes that are happening on ads platforms, whether that be the iOS 14 changes, et cetera. All of that is contributing to much higher CAC. And then to add to that, we see a world where a lot of brands are really facing this declining profit margin environment that's coming either from supply chain constraints, coming from potential tariffs or existing tariffs. Lots of things that are declining the profit that you are making for every purchase that's coming through a new customer. All of this is just making it harder to acquire a new customer profitably. And so with those challenges, we see a lot of brands doubling down and saying, look, we've spent the last handful of years or decade really focusing on how do we scale up new acquisition. We also now need to be focusing as much effort on how do we drive as much revenue as possible from our existing customers, our returning visitors, our returning customers. And so that is what we are going to be focusing specifically on today. Why the homepage? So obviously there's lots of areas of the site. We can talk about optimizing product pages for returning customers, lots of areas of the site we can talk about optimizing for returning customers. We're focusing today just on the homepage because historically, returning customers have used the homepage very much as that gateway back to the brand. So if you've bought from a brand before, you're brand aware, you know what the brand is, maybe somebody told you about a brand. At the end of the day, you're typing that URL in directly, either to your phone, to your browser, whatever it may be. You are then going directly to the homepage. So the homepage is the gateway for a returning customer. But historically, brands have thought about homepages and homepage design through the lens of a new visitor. So somebody who is not brand aware, who's somebody who needs to be introduced to the brand, introduced to the product lines, et cetera. And so when you look at homepage designs from competition, or maybe the very first design you did of your own store, much of the thought process that went into that homepage design was done through the lens of how do we introduce our brand to new customers. And so what we want to do today, assuming that most of you guys have already done that work and you've optimized for new visitors, how do we now think through optimizing that homepage experience so that we can leverage returning visitors to drive as much revenue and sales and conversions from returning visitors as possible, understanding that for a majority of them, they're going to be using that homepage as the gateway back into the brand. So what we're going to be doing right now, and I'm going to hand this much more talking over to Eric here in just a second. We want to talk about sort of 3 very specific strategies, and this is just the very beginning, sort of tip of the spear, but 3 strategies that we like to look at when we think about optimizing homepages for returning visitors. And so we'll break this down and we'll start talking about a few different opportunities that you guys can be applying specifically to your homepages as well. So Eric, I'm going to tap you in here and let's start talking about specifically how should brands be thinking about on their homepages optimizing product positioning or the products that they're introducing on the homepages. How should that thought process be different for new visitors versus returning visitors?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think it's important too because we have been seeing over the last quarter after quarter an increase in the share of returning visitors that are arriving on homepages. So I think in addition to kind of like how you set the stage in terms of that traffic makeup of new versus returning users, I think we're seeing an increase in the utilization of other top of funnel touch points for users, which then pushes a lot of that new user acquisition off of the homepage, which then makes the homepage more of a landing page for your returning users. Because those returning users, once they've made a purchase from you, they're probably most likely to either just go punch the URL back into their browser bar since they remember the brand name, remember the website, or they'll
Yeah.
just probably search or go through your socials and either come through like a branded keyword query or just a an organic social click, right? Those are the ways that we tend to see returning users most frequently arrive back at the website. Those returning users then are oftentimes most likely to be the ones landing at the homepage. The homepage, however, oftentimes does exactly what you see here in these wireframes, is that it'll show, some featured products and some featured collections. But if you think about the way that your catalog is structured, in most cases, there's one product that is most frequently purchased for a first-time customer. That first-time customer is probably going to buy your most popular item, right? Like, what is your best and brightest offering? That's always what we want to have at the forefront of a product feature for new visitors. But unless it's like a consumable, like like beverages,
Right.
hair, skin, and makeup, if it's not consumable and something that they're going to seek to replenish, instead, that successive session is going to look for something that complements their prior purchase or just increases the depth of their participation in your catalog. So a lot of times we'll see either one of these two approaches. You're either featuring your best sellers or you're featuring your new arrivals. I would posit that you should do both based on whether it is a returning user or a new user. For a new user, the best sellers, perfect. They want to see what is the most popular item so that they can understand why everyone else has been talking about the brand that has drove them to visit the website. And even if that product isn't especially relevant to their needs, they can still kind of use that to orient themselves to the rest of your catalog. New arrivals, however, are going to be increasingly relevant to that returning user audience because they're already familiar with the catalog. They know what your best sellers are. They know what was there last time they came. So they're probably more likely to be more interested in what are those new arrivals? What's been added since the last time I visited the website?
Yep. And how do you think about, so when you're optimizing for both, right? So we want to be optimizing for both the new and returning. Is the answer simply just to sort of make sure we're slapping both bestsellers and new arrivals on the page? How do you think about testing into what placement should be above, should be prioritized of the two? What's sort of your thought process around that?
Yeah. So we'll start at like the beginning of like an optimization journey. If you have done no testing and you have no data,
Yeah.
my best practice recommendation would be to start with collections first, followed by featured products, because those collections are going to feature more items. So it has a higher probability to be relevant to the needs of a user, right? If you have a large catalog and there's a lot of different collections, you want to make sure that users understand all of those different collections so that if they arrive at your site and let's say it's an apparel website and the first thing they see is a bunch of best-selling denim, but you also sell t-shirts. You want to be able to feature those collections, so that you do a little bit of marketing to let your users know, hey, here are the other categories that we operate within. But then it also allows users to slowly narrow their understanding of the scope of the catalog instead of jumping straight into a product. Now, that would be the approach sans any data or testing, just kind of like a
Right.
general best practice. Then from there, what we would do is take your total audience and run an A B test of just bestsellers versus just new arrivals, maybe even both with some sort of toggle between them or some sort of hierarchy established through some vertical stacking. Then we would take all that data captured during the A/B test and then break that into your new visitors versus your returning visitors in order to determine which one of those responded best to each. Most
Right.
of the time, that's exactly what we see, where new visitors respond best to understanding what your best sellers are, and then returning visitors want to see those new arrivals. So for the total audience, that A/B test usually ends up with those results. Then when it comes to personalization, you can still have both on the page, but prioritize which one you want to present based on a returning visitor. So let's say, for example, if it is a returning visitor, you're going to show them new arrivals at the top of the page, but then lower down on the page, there's usually little downside to also including those bestsellers there as a reminder in case they want to replenish or replace if the product, if it's relevant for your particular type of product.
Yeah, and I think to kind of double click on that concept too, because I think this is something that I'm constantly surprised by, especially for really established brands, is that so many brands are still just displaying the same ordering and merchandising on the homepage for anybody coming. We're talking about large eight figure, nine figure brands in lots of cases. They're not dynamically shifting the order or the merchandising on the homepage based upon just a simple metric like new versus returning. So, it's light personalization, but we're still just not seeing brands even take advantage of that light personalization in a lot of cases. Cool. Anything else you'd want to add in terms of what to think about in terms of product, merchandising on the homepage? Obviously, our recommendation is always going to be to test into this. A lot of this should be it should be a data-driven decision and understanding what's converting, what's not converting for your new versus your returning audience, and then merchandising it that way. But anything else you'd add as like a best practice in this front?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the echoing the A/B testing, because not only are you gathering the data to further your conversion rate, but you're also mitigating risk that's associated
Right.
by any change you're making to the website in the absence of that data. So let's say, for example, just swapped out. Let's say you have both of those sections available to you on your homepage for a bestsellers feature and a new arrivals feature, and you decide like, oh, I'm going to put new arrivals up there. Those new arrivals could be increasing conversion rate, but generating a lower average order value that then results in a net decline in revenue per visitor. So we always want to really encourage A/B testing because it adds that confidence to any of those changes. And that's really how we see our scaling clients really start to begin to gain traction when instead of just making changes on the website, they're measuring the effect of those changes so that they can do two things really is A, increase that session-based conversion rate metric, but also start to gather insights about what's important to your different audiences. You might see that, hey, maybe in your particular case, returning visitors do favor the best sellers, and we're just going to keep that for them because that's what the data shows that is best for that audience. So we always want to make sure that we're A/B testing to increase conversion rate, but also in order to learn a little bit more about the audience, because that helps us flesh out future A/B test hypotheses.
Yeah, and I think it's a good segue like directly into the next strategy. And what you guys are going to see as we're talking through this, we take a very data-driven approach to recommend all the recommendations that we make to brands. We are in a world now where you simply 5, 10 years ago could just pump money into Facebook ads and drive conversions profitably. That environment no longer exists. And so brands need to be much more sort of specific and laser specific in terms of how they think about optimizing every single step of that customer journey. And it's not just one journey, right? A new visitor is going to take a very different approach than a returning visitor. A new visitor needs to be messaged to very differently than a returning visitor. And so you should be thinking about all these various different segments of your audience and thinking through what needs to be delivered at each stage of that decision-making process that that customer is going through in order to move them to the next stage. And if you can optimize all those segments, then you find yourself in a position where you're going to be able to convert a lot more of that traffic that's coming to the site. So With that in mind, let's talk about promotions and this idea around, okay, we talked about merchandising. How should you be displaying products and collections to new versus returning? But Eric, how should we be thinking about messaging and just overall promotions that we may be presenting on the homepage to a new audience versus a returning user?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to promotions, right? Like in general, most marketing funnels are like relatively inefficient, right? We're running ads to get people to the website, we're presenting them some offer. And then if they don't take that offer, we continue to make more and more offers that usually just compress margins more and more and more as a user proceeds through the website. Those promotions rarely change based on what we know about that user. But I definitely think that they should, because a new user, if we want to like incentivize their first purchase with like a discount or a gift with purchase or whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're also not alienating our returning users who maybe didn't get that same great deal when they made their first purchase. So we always want to think about those promotions along this dimension too of new visitors versus returning visitors. For like the announcement banner shown here, you might not even need to immediately offer a promotion to a new user. You may want to decide, hey, you know what? I'm actually not going to like, on a 1 second delay of their first session of their first page view, immediately discount the brand and offer them whatever it is, 10, 15% discount or a gift with purchase. Instead, maybe I lead with the value, right? Here's why you should consider us instead of here's why you should discount what we're trying to sell you. So I really like the idea of taking that promotional bar for a new user and just starting with like a trust signal or brand statement in order to convey the value of the product as opposed to an immediate discount so that psychologically that user isn't ready to enter what I think over the years we've been training consumers to look for on e-commerce sites is just like those increasing levels of discount, right? So
Right.
that's for new users. Then for returning users, the last thing we want to do is if we have a customer who has become, a fan of the brand, we don't want them to come back and start seeing like, oh, here's all the great ways that we're incentivizing new customers to make a purchase that maybe I didn't get the benefit of when I made my first purchase. Instead, we want to think about the life cycle of that customer. How can we use that customer in order to improve their lifetime value and improve the share of the brand through word of mouth? So, something like a refer a friend is a great promotion for an existing customer because it's unlikely that someone's going to refer a friend until they've experienced the product, right? Then you're putting your own reputation on the line. If you recommend something that you actually haven't tried and then your friend tries it and they're like, hey, this fell apart as soon as I got it, or the customer service was terrible, right? It's a poor reflection on you. So most of those referrals we see are from existing customers. So using something like a refer a friend program is a great way to still continue to offer incentives after that first purchase, but doing so in a way that's tailored to that returning user audience.
Yep, I think that's fascinating, right? And I don't think brands think about messaging in that way, right? Or promotions in that way. I think sort of the add-on to that too is this idea around the data to kind of bring this back to data. We can see very specifically in your data what products are new visitors typically buying, and then what products are typically returning visitors buying, right? So if we can start to pattern match and say, okay, if you're a returning visitor, these are the types of products that we typically see somebody buy as their second item. Then you can if you are going to offer, discounted promotions or incentives to purchase, it doesn't have to be a discount. It could be free shipping. It could be anything that drives an incentive towards a purchase. You can also start to tailor those offerings specifically to your returning visitor, right, Eric?
Yeah, on like a product level, right? So like
Yeah.
I think the badge in the returning user indicates like a promotion that we might be offering at a specific item level. So
Yeah.
there's a bunch of great tools out there like Lifetimely, Dacity, or if you're just really nice with the queries on your customer database, you can pull this right out of Shopify too.
Yeah.
But understanding that product affinity, right? if a new user is most likely to purchase product A in their first purchase, then product B or their second purchase will be, will be able to see what is the most likely item for someone to purchase in their second visit or their second time making a purchase from us. So that's another way that for those returning users, instead of even just a refer a friend or like a blanket promotion, you can help guide users through your catalog in a way that reflects the data that you've already captured to understand, like, okay, if someone always buys what I use first, like a denim example, everyone buys that denim first and then they come back later to buy like a t-shirt that goes with that denim. What we can do is help guide users towards that, because I think that's always really like the holy grail of optimization, right? Is to find patterns in the data of what your audience is doing already, because that's an indication of what the users want and what they're looking for, the problems that they're trying to solve for with their visit to the site today. And then if we can arrange the site in a way that furthers that, what we're doing is we're improving business performance by improving the user experience based on what those users have already indicated to us that they want and what they're looking for. That, I think, is oftentimes the holy grail, because you're growing your business by creating a better experience for your customers.
Yep. And I think that's we're giving some very specific examples, but one of the benefits of running, A/B testing is that you can test into not just sort of product placements and promotions, but it's all the elements that exist within a homepage. And so, as an example, there may be a scenario where that displaying, press mentions or displaying very specific customer testimonials goes a long way in building trust for a very, very new first-time visitor. But for somebody who's returning, who's already bought from you, that actually just gets in the way of them actually getting down into the product catalog faster, especially maybe on like a mobile device. And so when you start to think about, one, A/B testing obviously is an incredible tool for understanding what's going to increase, revenue and conversions. But it's also a way, like Eric had mentioned, to really understand for your different segments of the audience what is driving sales, right? What do they care about? What do they not care about? And that's information and data that you can use and leverage throughout the entire marketing stack, not just on the homepage. So when you think about, optimizations, we're sort of naming a few specific things, but there's all the elements of the homepage as well as throughout the rest of the site that can be tailored, tweaked, moved around, removed, or presented depending upon a new versus returning visitor, if you actually have the data to back what elements are driving sales and which items are not driving sales. And then Lawrence actually asked a question real quick, just because we were talking about A/B testing, what A/B testing, tools and platforms that do we use? So there's lots of them out there, Lawrence, depending upon the e-commerce platform you're on. If you're on Shopify, as an example, there's some Shopify specific ones like Visually, et cetera, that are great. VWO is great. Convert.com is great. We use Convert for the majority of our clients. And then there's also lots of tools if you want to do things like price testing and things like that. IntelliGems is a great tool. So there's a handful of good tools out there that you should choose from depending upon what you want to be testing on your site. All right, let's talk about sort of the final strategy here, and this goes to, at the end of the day, the more data you have, right, the better you can personalize that experience. And so, Eric, let's talk a little about why do we want to encourage users and visitors to log in into the site?
Yeah. So in order to do anything we've discussed at this point, you have to have that signal that a user is a new visitor or a returning visitor or a returning customer. Those are three different things, right? You can only be a new visitor once, but you can be a returning visitor without a returning purchaser. So those different audiences are able to be identified at different levels throughout your kind of data stack. If we can get a user to log in, that is the most robust way to have access to all of that transactional data of what they've purchased in the past, so that we can recommend like that second most popular second item, or if we're going to recommend items that are complementary to what they've purchased in that first session, we need all that transactional data. So the more we can get someone to log in, the more easily we can make those really relevant recommendations to that user. This is like the most like watertight way to do it if you think about it. Once they're logged in, then we know based on that their email address and that account, we know how many times they visited the website, how many purchases they've made, and what was included in each of those purchases. So that's really helpful in order to do anything from merchandising products throughout the site or making user specific offers. So encouraging someone to log in is really important in terms of creating robust experiences for new and returning users. Some of the ways that I think are really effective in doing that are kind of like dangling the carrot of any of your like LTV initiative programs, whether it's like a membership that you have or a loyalty program. If you have these items that require somebody to log in, oftentimes it can be even something less committal, like a wish list, right? A lot of times you'll see if you have a wish list on your website, you need to log in to see those items. The reason for all of that is because then we get all this data about your shopping behavior and your affinities, even pre-purchase, but even more effective for a user who has created a purchase. Then from there, if we can just incentivize those users to like, like, oh, make sure you log in order to see like your rewards balance, or make sure you log in to apply credits from our membership program. Using those items to move that login to the beginning of the session instead of logging in at checkout is a really effective way to make sure that we're personalizing. It's not the only way, however. Beyond that, we can, any of our testing tools or any of our testing tools are also going to be able to an extent, identify new and returning users. This is where I think having Google Analytics on your website is really important too, because Shopify Analytics isn't great at letting you know which sessions are from new visitors or returning visitors. They're really good at telling you if a purchase is from a new customer or an existing customer, but GA is definitely better on a session basis to help determine whether it's new or returning. That data set is based on your cookies. So that underlying tech is what allows us to do it if you haven't logged in. I would say if a logged in user is like 100% accuracy, that cookie approach is probably 50%. So it's a lot better than 100 or a lot better than 0, but nowhere near 100. But it's still a good step in the right direction. Those cookie data can vary in its efficacy based on the frequency with which your purchasers are coming to the website, right? If it's a highly replenishable item, those users are probably coming back to purchase again and again within that cookie window. So we're retaining a lot of that data. That's not always the case, but it does give us a way to start to create some of these experiences and capture some data short of those purchases. But anything we can do to encourage those logged in users is the most robust way to do it.
Yep, that's absolutely right. So at the end of the day, you can still do personalization just based upon sort of cookie sessions. But at the end of the day, using some of these strategies to get as many of those returning visitors to log in is going to be able to allow you to personalize to that next level of depth. Awesome. Okay. So Eric, I think let's go ahead and let's jump into a couple quick teardowns here. We've got a couple brands that we've already sort of preloaded that we can talk about. And then for anybody who's joining us today that wants us to take a look at their homepage, go ahead and drop it into the chat. I see a few of you guys already have, but go ahead and just drop those in if you haven't yet. And we'll start working our way through those as well. So we've picked a couple brands, and let's go ahead and start with Rourke. And the reason why I picked Rourke was very specifically because I've actually purchased from them very recently. And so I was very curious just to see if just right off the bat, they were providing or changing up their merchandising or the way that they presented products on their homepage specifically for a returning, purchaser or returning visitor. At the end of the day, the answer is no. If you look at the site, it's the exact same across the board, even when you log in. And so there really is no personalization on that front being done, which I do think is a big missed opportunity here. Eric, on your side, when you took a look at their site, what was sort of the big call outs or opportunities that you're seeing on the homepage?
The first thing I can't get past is that the logo is not centered, but that's not relevant to today's conversation.
It isn't, is it? You're right.
I can't let it go.
Uh-huh.
So new and returning is a great dimension to personalize upon, but in this case, another option is this shop men's versus shop women's. That is probably going to be a very relevant dimension in order to personalize upon. So in the hero section, there's those two CTAs for shop men's and shop women's. That click, if we can determine if a user is clicking on shop men's or shop women's, then the rest of the user experience should change based on that click, right? Almost like what are those books we used to read as kids where like you choose your own adventure, right? Or like you can go through this path and the rest of the story is different. That should be the effect of clicking on either of those main CTAs. Because before you even have the chance to become a returning user, we want to know what you're shopping for. Are you shopping the men's side of the catalog or the women's side of the catalog? I messed around in this the same way, like clicked into women's, and when I came back to the website or back to the homepage, even within the same session, it didn't default my new arrivals product slider here to the women's option, right? Like that click is a very important signal that we can use to start doing some personalization of the homepage, even short of new versus returning. Then, since we are here to talk about new and returning, one thing that I think Rourke is a good example of is it's a brand that probably has like a complete turnover of the catalog every
Yep.
season, right? I can see here this is the summer collection. So they might not have like an evergreen best-selling like single item that they're offering, right? But I can tell here that this is their summer collection. It's brand new. So the as this new collection starts to gather some data, we'll really quickly be able to identify those best sellers, right? Instead of for like, it looks like all users right now are seeing the new arrivals here. Instead, as you start to establish best sellers, as sales start coming in, I would then probably recommend that they start using best sellers here for those new users, and then use the new arrivals that you see here only for returning users, because we want to make sure that the returning users, even if they're shopping within the certain season, that they are seeing the items that are the latest arrivals. And then we can that's another example of where we can start to personalize those recommendations based on somebody's past purchase data. So like, for example, if I came to this website and I had only ever purchased like a bunch of black long sleeve shirts during the winter collection, then a great idea. Let's make sure that that recommendation of new arrivals leads with featured imagery of like at least like dark solid colors, not a bunch of prints. So a few examples there of how you can personalize based on a initial dimension of men's versus women's, and some other ideas of how they could be doing it based on new and returning.
Yep, I think that's an excellent point. And Jerry brought something up in the chat that I'll address too, because we didn't really address like the technical side of this. But Jerry was saying like he doesn't know exactly, how would you even change the UX, per user on a homepage if your Shopify theme doesn't, out of the box allow that, which it doesn't. And the answer is simply you need to use a tool to do it, or you need to have a developer customize it within the theme for you. That's this level of personalization is not something you're going to get with an out of the box theme on Shopify. You're going to have to go that extra level and have a dev customize it for you. There are some tools out there and apps that will do this to a certain degree. But the best way would just be through a customization. Also, when you've got logged in users, that is going to be like Eric was mentioning. Once a user is logged in, you absolutely have the ability to showcase which pages can be displayed to a user, what elements on a page can be displayed to a user. That typically does require Shopify Plus functionality to do, but it can be done in Shopify, and it typically is best done with the dev.
And I think this is an interesting intersection with the last question about tools, right? There are non-A/B testing tools that you can use to achieve this, right? Like something like
Yeah.
Rebuy would allow you
Yep.
to change your merchandising based on new versus returning users on the homepage. Among the A/B testing tools, like honestly, there's very little difference and like in different little distinction between the different tools out there. Like each one has kind of like what they're really good at, right? Like VWO is free, right? So like you can start with VWO for free and just start to begin to establish your culture of experimentation. Then you'll find probably pretty quickly that like VWO has like a lot of limitations in terms of like its functionality if you are not an engineer, right? That's where something like visually at the other end of the spectrum, like visually, if you're on Shopify, is like a one-click install and is probably the least developer needy tool,
Yep.
right? It's the most like marketer friendly, I guess would be the opposite of that. Marketer
Right.
friendly tool out there. Convert tends to be like in the middle, in a little bit of a between of both. So each one has like small ways that it can suit your particular needs better, right? If you don't have like a dev or access to a developer, maybe something like Visually is a better approach because it's a little bit more user friendly. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I think the most important thing is to like start doing some testing so that you can understand how valuable it is to have that data and then decide kind of like, okay, now from there, like you can kind of triangulate yourself and say like, oh, I need more like marketer capabilities, or I need more robust reporting. And you can kind of jump platforms based on what you find from that first step.
Yep. I think that's the great insights on the tool side, specifically as it relates to Shopify. And Shopify definitely has the most robust set of tool sets as of right now from a platform standpoint. Um, Okay, cool. So that is Rourke. I think let's talk about one more here on our side, then we'll open it up and let's do a couple live teardowns from folks that are on the call. Let's talk about Tecovas. So I'm assuming most people here that are in D2C have heard of Tecovas. This is definitely one of the sort of the darling D2C Tecova brands. They've been around for a while. Started off with boots and they've expanded into kind of all lines of shoes and sort of Western style apparel. I also made a purchase from Tecovas recently, so that's why I chose this because I wanted to see what they were going to be customizing for me as a user when I logged in, or just as coming back. And the reality is, again, nothing. So there's really for a very sophisticated meaning established brand that has been around for a while and is at, a pretty large level of scale at this point. It does not appear that they're doing much in terms of personalization or customization, which I think is very interesting and probably a huge low-hanging fruit for them. They are offering, they've kind of settled on this idea of like, okay, new arrivals, bestsellers, we're going to showcase both, immediately. But regardless of the user, they are defaulting to new arrivals on page load. Eric, what are your thoughts on Dakova's homepage?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? If you think about like you mentioned, they're pretty established.
Yeah,
They've been around a while, and I think I think they're probably about 10x the size of Rourke in terms of sales volume. But I
yep,
actually think Rourke's homepage hero is better because that lighted up shop new arrivals main CTA takes you to a gender neutral like catalog, or not even gender neutral, but like a combined
yeah,
category page
combined,
of new
right?
arrivals, right? It's not split based on men's versus women's, but there's going to be a very clear, and it's not like a subjective like gender identity thing, right? Like there's boots that are going to fit one type of foot and boots that are going to fit another type of foot,
Uh-huh,
right?
exactly.
So I think you're very safe to have a clear split there for shop men's new arrivals, shop women's new arrivals. That's in the hero. So I think Rourke is probably outperforming relative to Jacobus in that regard.
Yep, yep, it's a good
Then
call out.
I do like the tabs. Like the tabs, I think are okay. I think when we analyze heat maps, we tend to see that users are probably more likely to scroll another two viewports down the homepage and see an additional section that we dedicate to bestsellers than they would be to click on that tab. I think a lot of times those tabs, especially with the Tacova styling here, like
Yeah,
is it's not even like I wouldn't even describe it as like a link styling, right? Like you don't know necessarily that you could click on that. It's just
yeah.
not super clear, right? Like
It's very
they want
ambiguous.
to,
It's almost you could almost say, okay, is this grouping new arrivals? This grouping is bestsellers. Like you could almost
yeah,
be viewed as a titling versus a tabbing. I think the design on that is very weak.
yeah, I agree, and I think the yeah, that like it's just not prominent enough, right? Or and like oftentimes I think we will see brands make this sacrifice, right? As like, oh, I want to have like a beautiful website, or somebody in the art department said it needs to be this way. But like that is not always like what the users are going to favor, right? Like I think at the end of the day, like we A/B test and we analyze data to make sure that we're building websites that reflect the needs of the users, not the interests of somebody in like the art department or like just what the founder wants, right?
Yep. Yep.
um, so yeah, I think it's a nice feature to have both. I think an interesting test for them would be to have another row dedicated to bestsellers a little bit farther down the page, and then do that
Hmm.
personalization based on new versus returning user, so that that new user sees the bestsellers in its current placement, and then the a returning users would see new arrivals in that top billing.
Cool. Anything else you want to call out on Tecovas while we've got them up? Or should we jump and do a couple live attendee websites?
I think the only other thing I would mention is like merchandising. So
Yep.
we talked a little bit about merchandising. This is a really great, like it's a huge catalog. And it's
Hmm.
a catalog that I think lends itself really well to returning user merchandising based personalizations. Because if I've bought some like leather cowboy boots in the past, I may then be coming back like really quickly to get some like conditioning for them, or
Sure.
some sort of like protectant, right? There's a lot of complementary products that I may want to come back and get from a post purchase. So that's a great way where if you can identify somebody that has come to the website and has prior made a purchase, then we can make specific product recommendations based on that purchase, right? We know like, oh, you purchased a light leather pair. Here's our, like light leather shoe polish or something like that, right? That's a great way to make sure that we're using that signal of what they've purchased in the past to improve that user experience for those successive sessions.
Yep. And Scott was asking here, how do you customize for a new versus returning user if they're just inputting the homepage URL? And Scott, that was sort of what we were mentioning earlier in the strategies, is that the best way to do it is to encourage a login. So get them to actually log in, and that way you know that they're not just returning, but you can actually use and utilize their past purchase data to then customize what gets displayed to them. But if they're not logging in, you can use cookies. So you can say, okay, look, however long that cookie session is, if I've, in my case, I've been to Tecovas within the last 2 weeks, I'm returning again. You can use that cookie data to then say, okay, this is a returning visitor, and you can then dynamically change the display and the elements on that page to that returning visitor if you know that data. And this is what we were saying to Jerry's question earlier, which is that's not a default setting in Shopify. That's something you can just set up in your Shopify theme. That's something that does require custom development or requires the use of a third-party tool to do it. Cool. And then Raul is asking, does the strategy change if new product launches are rare and new arrivals would be stale? So
I
meaning like
think,
when you don't have a bunch of new product being released, I think that's the question, right?
yeah, if you have like a really evergreen catalog, then I think that's an even more compelling argument in favor of always presenting those bestsellers as opposed
Yeah.
to those new arrivals, right? In the same
Yep.
regard, I think even more compelling on a new versus returning user personalization basis, to make sure that when there is a new arrival, since it is more rare, that gets like, an extra highlight on the homepage, especially for those or those returning users, to make sure that they do feel like there's a reason to keep coming back to the website and checking in to see those new arrivals. We want to make sure that when that does happen, you are making a big deal out of those.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, I think it's an even more compelling reason to say if you do have a more static catalog, to really get people who have purchased to log back in, so incentivizing logins so that you can see what has been purchased from them prior, because then you can start to data match as you go, okay, well, look, we know this person has already purchased a pair of boots, and that we know historically by looking at our data that people who have purchased boots, their second purchase is typically a shirt, right? Just as an example. And so you can provide merchandising, and you can change the merchandising throughout the site, but on the homepage specifically to match what you're seeing in the data. And so again, another reason to try to utilize that customer purchase data as much as you can, get them to log in or utilize a tool to present that to them. Cool. All right, let's pull up a couple of brands here. I'm not sure if we're going to get through everybody here in time, but let's see. Nutrient survival. Let's pull up Margot, Elena, and then Brown trading. All right. Nutrient survival. All right. Protects those you love. Nothing prepares you like proper nutrition. So we're looking at supplements and what looks like kind of freeze-dried or powdered products, right? So everything from like emergency kits to, I guess, so my guess is this is mainly focused on kind of preparation, right? So preparing for the worst, right? I'm assuming if I'm understanding the positioning correctly. And feel free, whoever brand this is, to jump in.
And I think I'll actually jump in on that too. Like the uncertainty is an insight in and of itself, right? Like
Agreed. Yep.
your value proposition is not clear enough to a
Right.
new user, right? You want to make sure that you're welcoming users to the website with a really clear statement of who you are, what you offer, and what sets you apart from the competition.
Yep, completely agree. I think that it's a clever tagline, protect those you love, but it's again, what does that mean? Are we protecting them in case of emergency? Is this a one-off? Am I stocking this in the, in the garage in case of, the apocalypse? Or is this something I take on a camping trip because it's highly nutritious and can be packable, right? I think there's multiple different use cases here, and we probably need to be a little more clear on that front especially for a new visitor. Explore products, right? So we've got number 10 cans, emergency kits, bug out bags, sample packs. So we are introducing, the different various different categories of use to users, which is good. So we're starting to understand sort of the breadth of the catalog a bit and what those use cases would be. Not quite sure what a number 10 can is. So that's sort of my immediate first question is why would I care about a number 10 can? So again, I think there's some explanation that could be done for new visitors specifically here. Eric, anything else you'd call out right off the bat?
Nothing like I think in the absence of data, aside from maybe in that promo banner, I do see that you have like a really, I think, well designed kind of like teaser bar, right? To encourage people to fill up that progress bar to get that
Agreed.
free shipping. The only thing I would question is that the most valuable message to present to a new user at the very top of the page, right?
Yep.
If I'm not clear on what the product is or what I want to purchase yet, free shipping is probably not something that I've even started to consider yet. So that could be a good place to, maybe put something that explains what the brand is or what sets it apart a little bit more, to do some more of that storytelling and customer onboarding so that users start to gain an understanding of the product and the catalog before they start to consider some of the transactional details, like, am I going to have to pay for shipping or not?
Yep. And I think it's a great point that sort of layers in for what we were talking about earlier around this idea of customizing the messaging at various different stages of the purchase funnel process. So if somebody's here showing up for the very first time, like Eric mentioned, free shipping, not that relevant unless you've decided you already want the product or that it solves your need. And I think what a lot of brands miss is that this can be customized, based upon per page. Not easily, typically have to do that custom, but you should probably be displaying different messaging in those banner notifications at different pages on the site and not just having one static notification that appears on every single page, because depending upon what the page they're on, if they're on a product page, they've already decided they're interested in the product. At that point, free shipping is much more relevant versus the homepage. You should be utilizing that space for different messaging, something that's probably either going to be introducing the product or building trust in the product.
Yeah, here's actually another idea. Scroll down. Can I see the prices on those? Okay, cool. Those are okay. All the number 10 cans are different. So I'm familiar with the space. So I do like number 10 can is it's I think like a industry specific standard size. So I understand the number 10 can. What I was hoping is that all of those were $40 or more so that we could add some specificity to that free shipping offer, right? Like all number 10 cans ship free. That might be something you could apply to, like, for example, like emergency kits or something like that. Assuming those are probably a little bit higher priced, multiple items. But yeah, I think there's some cool stuff that you can do with those types of promotions to make them seem easier to unlock while also adding like that specificity of all emergency kits ship free or something like that.
Cool. All right. I think let's go and jump here. Let's talk about Margot Elena, if I'm saying that correctly. All right. Flash sale up to 80% off luxury, lovely luxuries. I'm assuming that's a perfume. I'm assuming it's all perfumes just by looking at the products. Welcome to the world of Margot Elena. Meticulously crafted brand libraries, beautifully balanced in design, fragrance, and formulation. Okay.
I think that's good. Like tying together this and the last one is like, I love the idea of just making like a little bit of a brand introduction, right? Like
Agreed.
introducing yourself to like new users. It looks like based on the navigation that this is a pretty large catalog.
Yep.
And the larger the catalog is, I think the more effective a new versus returning user personalization strategy can be, right? Because the bigger your catalog is, it really, the way I think of it is it's just more ways that you can position a need for customers, right? If they've purchased something in the past, then here's what you should purchase next. Or if we know that you only purchase from us in this one category, we can then continue to recommend within this category. That's a recommendation that we could even apply like the now trending product listings here. Like
Yep.
I
That's about to say.
imagine these are the maybe latest arrivals, best selling, or even like just curated ones that are like actually like trending in terms of rising sales over a short period of time. Using like a now trending label is actually like a great way, especially if you have a high amount of new users coming from traffic from like PPC platforms. So if you're doing a bunch of ads that are sending a lot of new traffic to the website, creating a sense of like, like it's almost a way of establishing a fear of missing out, right? Here are the things that are trending now. Instead of, just listing it as like, these are new arrivals or bestsellers, that's a great way to add like, I think a little bit more like character to it, but then also create a little bit of a sense of missing out. Like, oh, these are trending, like, here's what's popular right now. So it's not like an evergreen, here's our bestseller all the time. It's here's kind of like, what is the latest, the trendiest, like, what is the item that everyone needs to have right now? It's these ones. That is usually really effective for both new and returning users because it has that short window of relevancy, right? If it is a trending item, we know that that trend won't last forever.
Jerry is also asking in the comments, what if you offer promotions pretty frequently? So example, flash sale up to 80% off all luxury, lovely luxuries. So a good example of a promotion that's being offered. So if you offer promotions pretty frequently, like a site-wide category sale, do you promote that hard on the homepage and keep like a strong new user experience that tells a strong brand story, or push that promotion hard? So I think the question is, how hard do you push how do you balance promotions versus telling the story to a new user around who you are and what you stand for and why they should care?
But yeah, so I think in two different scenarios, if you always have a promotion live, actually, let me take one step back. So like an evergreen introduction is probably, if you were to A/B test that, it's probably not going to beat a promotion, right? Because a promotion is always a great incentive to create a purchase. The if you always have promotions, then I would present both, but with some hierarchy to it, right? With like, okay, we always have the promotion in, let's say, the homepage hero, and then an evergreen brand message lives in that promo bar at the very top, or in kind of like a text statement in the section right below the homepage hero. If there's always promotions, then I think it makes sense to always have both, like a promotional section and a evergreen section, but in that hierarchy, right? So that we're always promoting that discount, but then also introducing the brand to users as new users arrive at the website. Or if promotions are more periodic, then I think that's like a great case to like, then let's replace whatever our evergreen is and replace that with the big promotional statement to make sure that we make a huge deal out of it and everyone, like new and returning users, realize that this is a limited time offer and that there aren't always promotions. Like how you have the end date on the sale here is a great way for those new users to incentivize them to act quickly, to make their purchase today, so that they don't, like wait for the next promotion or for there potentially to be no promotion. It just helps to shorten that sales cycle.
Perfect. All right, so last one here real quick. Eric, if you've got, do you have an extra minute or do you have to jump?
I actually have a client waiting. I should probably jump over to that call.
Okay. Well, sorry. All right, sorry guys. Brown trading. We'll have to do you guys next time. So join the next one and we'll do a teardown for you guys. But thanks everybody. We'll let Eric jump. And then for everybody who is still here, thanks for joining us today. We do these typically about once a month. So feel free to join our next one. We'll let you guys know via the newsletter. If you have not signed up, just go to bluestout.com or go to thecommercelab.com, which is our newsletter landing page. Both will give you access to sign up for the newsletter. And then, as always, as I mentioned, if you have joined us today, if you think or you know there's low-hanging fruit on your site and you want us to get eyes not only on the site itself, but on analytics. Today in the teardowns, we're just looking at the site. We don't have the data behind the site. But if you want us to actually take a look at your data to understand what's working and what's not working, as long as you're doing at least, typically at least 50,000 sessions a month, ideally more than 100,000 sessions a month, then that's going to be enough data for us to do a full site analytics audit. And if you're joining us today, we are offering 50% off our full site audits. It's a full custom data studio that we built out for your brand, showing you very specifically all the areas of opportunity that you can capitalize on. And so if that's something that you think is a good fit for you and your brand, just go to bluestout.com/strategy, book a call time, and either myself or somebody else on our team will talk you through the process, and we'll get you all lined up with an audit. All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time today. Thanks for showing up. I know we went a little bit over the hour, but hopefully this was helpful for everybody. We will be sending out a recording for everybody who attended, or also everybody who signed up. So you can look out for that probably later this week, maybe early next week, once we get it all compiled and pulled together. So everybody have a great week and a great weekend, and we'll see you on the next one.